Thank you everybody for coming and seeing the show. The title, I always play the title game because there's so many titles to be made, and so many of the works themselves have a very Excel's type title, but the exhibition title has always been a challenge for me to try and figure out what is the overarching idea of these, even for this exhibition, these two seemingly different bodies of works. And so conditions for holding a natural form was a way that both bodies of works overlap, and essentially meant the rules that people make to make meaning from natural form, so like abstraction.
I think one of the reasons I asked that question is because when you're in the exhibition and you're seeing the rocks that people have brought in from their own collections in the show, you can't help noticing the bases, which are all perfectly shaped to fit the specific stones, and then looking at the frames on your drawings, on your works on the wall, which do something similar but differently.
I think that the base is very important because it's the moment in which someone is deciding that this is a bottom. Before this rock was just existing as abstraction in nature, but by placing it in a particular configuration, then someone is going into a relationship with the object and defining it for what they see in this shape.
Do you think in a way that's similar to what you do? I mean, because you can't help make that equivalence when you're in that room.
I'd say that the front room works are more like that. It's basically figuring out, for me, I can't control the resulting images, but I have set a set of steps that are very inflexible in a way, like the duration of the exhibition, or the location, or the dimension of the panel, or that it's graphite, etc. But I think that that's kind of my version of putting a base in the atmosphere of the space.
Might be worth quickly explaining
what it is.
What those works are. Yeah.
Yes, so the works in the front room are these graphite panels that have been made by collecting the moisture level in climate-controlled places. And so in previous exhibitions that I've had, I'm trying to figure out a way to recognize that there is a moisture level in to explain technically. And so the panel is being made, the image in the panel is being made during the duration of an exhibition in essentially a climate-controlled space. And in the room, there's a dehumidifier that is collecting the moisture of the room, and then the water ejects and gets dropped in a super saturated with graphite fabric, and if there's more moisture, then there'll be more water, and the image will be darker, and so and it stops at the end of the exhibition. And many of them, of course, are in response to conservators saying that I can't introduce new water into the exhibition space, but water is already there, so it was just how to collect it.
So I was curious, when you describe those works, you make it sound like the building and the air inside it is what produced the work. And I'm wondering, there is an aesthetic to those works, and you set up a system that produces a type of result. So what role do your own aesthetic judgments and tastes play in it?
I think that these, for me, in relationship to my own aesthetic decisions, come parallel to what I like to do. As you can see in the exhibition, there's very tightly rendered drawings, and these are a way for me they are made parallel to each other because I draw normally very tightly. And so to be able to make a system that makes an image in which I don't know what the shape will be is kind of making the subject of the work be leading more than whatever I would like it to look like.
And I guess, does that mean that you have to accept whatever the system produces for those works, or there's some times when you think, oh, that one's not very good, let's get rid of it?
Yes, have to accept. And so I think actually of them as a receipt. Like for me the work was setting up all the steps and then the image itself is like the audience will be able to see the receipt of all of these other steps that happened before them. And so when I think of them, it's like I think of myself as co-producer with the moisture level that whether it wants to show up or not, I can't decide. So if it's a really, 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 really dry place, it'll be white.
Yeah.
Or something.
So by contrast, the works in the second gallery are the works of objects you've assembled, and that's different in a way that you have to take slightly more responsibility for the authorship of them. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how that works, how you select what to do.
When I tried to figure out each panel has a different categorizational system that they follow, but I tried to pick like really, really basic ones because the idea is that anyone can make these categories. And so I think that was also a reason why we did the open call, because I think that the stories that people have submitted on why they categorize their own rocks is almost like more compelling than mine own. And so I think that together because something that I want is not to say that my special categorization is what makes the artwork the work, but it's more like that there are rules that these rocks now have that make them in this particular configuration.
It seems to me as you're saying that perhaps that what we're really talking about is when the rocks you were talking about, the ones on the plinth in the middle of the room with the stories of the people who've collected them, I guess, or inherited them. But it seems to me that what we're talking about now is when the rock stops being a rock and starts being something like an artwork, and where that kind of boundary line lies, and perhaps in the drawings as well, there's a playfulness about that.
Yeah, I think that because I have made so many works about institutional collections and this is a personal collection, I actually like to think about how that same material actually changes meaning through different generations of people. And so through the rocks, because it's not so recognizable, it's like nature made of stone, and different generations of people have labeled it differently. It seems it is kind of shortcut version to thinking about like bigger collections, which happens over centuries and generations instead of one person to another.
So how did you first develop the interest in scholar stones?
Well, I'm a rock fan, and so I wanted to make a summer of rocks, but essentially they're kind of a placeholder for other type of objects, but technically it was because when I had my show here in 2023, I did a site visit for a project at MMCA that was about larger boulder stones, and so the scholar stones was obviously, I ran into them, but because there were more impersonal collections and institutional ones, and then that didn't make it into the big show, so it's been hanging out in my desktop since then.
So with the signals works, you described them as being like a receipt and denied any responsibility for how they came out. Was it the same with the open call, where you decided you have to accept everything?
Yes. No. There was a cutout, actually, because people made sculptures of rocks, so they had to be kind of naturally occurring. Yes. I'm like, epoxy resin looking rock doesn't count. So I did edit. But I actually think that the signal works are the most controlled ones, because when I think about them, it's a singular system that has produced all of these different images, but they're so tightly bound that the system doesn't, from the first one, it has been exactly the same system. And so I think that those are the most controlled authored ones, actually.
I'm going to go back a little bit to what you were saying about editing in terms of the rocks, because it seems that one of the themes in your work more generally is how we edit the objects we treasure or the things we accept as part of the culture, and how those editings can be just some more or less arbitrary, and perhaps the signal works are also kind of the moisture that's been edited out of the institution.
I think that the editing, when I think of collections, is basically understanding what is the function of this material for us today. And so once we define what the organizational system that we want, then things that we might have had forever that don't fit in that anymore get cut out. But I think that it becomes recognizing that the functions of these objects are changing all the time, and so that, you know, whatever, I mean, institutionally, whatever you inherit, now it used to be a particular category, but now for us it's something else. Does it fit our, what we need this material to do today?
So maybe to make it more personal now, I was wondering, because for instance, my mother's Sri Lankan and I have a particular relationship with the culture of Sri Lanka, which is in part filtered through her. So in part it's already 50 years old when she left the place. And in part I recognise that my idea of Sri Lankan culture isn't like someone who grew up there and is the same age as me. Is that similar for you, like with different cultural backgrounds of yourself? Do you think you have a particular sensitivity to how these ideas of a culture or a collection or a narrative or a history are formed?
I think that many of the projects that the subject of the works that I make are kind of chosen by things I want to learn because I don't know. And so, you know, these stones have been familiar to me for a very long time, but I don't have the skill set to know why a scholar has picked this particular rock until I read about it. But I also do have a relationship to them, and so I think that for me it's not about necessarily defining these rocks as the particular culture that they already exist in, but as figuring out a way that the same kind of abstract forms mean something to me also as well. So even if it's just as a placeholder within my works, you know, it could be like rocks or cups or pens or whatever. But because there was the opportunity to work through these ideas of personal collections, and I wanted to do a particular summer of rocks, and I wanted to spend time reading about how the scholars even picked. That's why they ended up like that. But I also, when we got some of the responses from the call about grandchildren who, kids who inherited these stones, and now their own relationship to the rocks is not even the association version, then it really felt like it gave me a more kind of peace of mind that I could also have a particular relationship with the stones, because it wasn't so attached to the formal qualities that somebody with particular knowledge of the scholar rocks themselves know. So it's already been expanded.
So I was going to ask what else you learned. I mean, you talked about through these processes learning things, so what else you learned? And then I thought, just to increase the pace, I'd throw in a second question. And is there a difference? You've done a lot of works with institutional collections. And then is there a difference in a different kind of responsibility when you're working with personal collections or using personal collections in the work?
I technically learned how to make that graphite one. Was made graphite because it's very hard to keep it clean. So I was like, I will try to make one this way to learn if I can keep it clean, but that's a technical one. But to me, because I have made institutional shows consistently, another way to think through personal collections was because this is a gallery space. And so the change between a cultural space that we all share into this particular space, which is more personal to individuals and not a general thing, was also a way that I'm learning through that too.
I'm sure Kukje Gallery think of it as no different from an institution. But anyway, what I was going to ask next is partly about how you think of collections in general. Because I think with the work, in order to do it, you have to have some sort of love for collections and accumulations of objects. But at the same time, often there are slight critiques of those collections embedded in them. So I wondered if you could talk a bit more about the sort of...
I think my interest in collections is not necessarily about the objects at all. It's more like how people organize things, why people think that this is the particular set that we need to preserve, and how, you know, when you go see older institutional collection, the text tells you a story of what relationship someone in the past had with that material, which is not at all the same as the relationship we have to it as a material, but sometimes the existing relationships never really stopped. And so what is interesting to me is that the editing or the reasons why people keep the display or collecting practices says more about what people want historical material to do for them today than whatever this past history that is kind of front of the house.
In that sense, do you think that what you described about the scholars' rocks, where there's a scholar who says, that rock, for this reason, and then it gets handed down to someone else, maybe can't quite see it, but has to sort of stick with it somehow, or come up with a new one, is very much the same as an institution?
Yes, because sometimes you see works in an institution and I think that people know and question, why is this even here? And so many of the times when there's this particular object, it's basically because someone else before had a reason why it was there to begin with, and the new reason why this object is still here is because of a respect to previous traditions. So that's not even about whatever the essential qualities of that object is at all, but more about maintaining the continuity of the field.
And then, given that your own works are in institutional collections as well, how do you feel when they join this tradition?
I think that many of my works come from my own anxiety about how my own works will enter into this particular same container. But many of the works that I use as subjects were not made to be artworks to begin with. And so I think that I worry that my own works, once they're collected, would have lost the particular relationship that I have to the work. But I think that maybe in one generation, someone who has my work will have, like, the artist said that this is what the work is about, but 100 years from now, someone else will be like, they loved gravity or whatever, and then now it's not even my version anymore. But I think that it's, what I would hope is to recognize that the new version, that's not my version anymore, would be what is the word, when you reattributed.
Yeah.
So the new author is that new person who says it's about X. And I think, you know, with institutions you can even see it in one step, because a conservator and a registrar and a curator is also kind of co-authoring what the audience will see. You know, when I think about, like, light requirement for photos or something, now the conservator is co-authoring the fact that this photo only lives in the dark for X amount of time, which the author was like, never was like, needs to be in the light for 2 hours or something, you know? So that's a new work that is made in collaboration with a conservator.
So given all that, would you say that perhaps that your own work is a kind of rehearsal for you letting go of your authorship of it?
I think that we have no choice. You always lose the authorship, and so it's more. I don't think that the questions are more for me, but more for institutions to recognize that, you know, these objects that we see are not single author works, and that people can't hide behind a particular author that is not alive anymore to say, no way, that was not my work. That's your version, and so please put and this.
So I was wondering, during the course of making this show, if you ended up with a feeling of what made a good rock? or if you have a favorite rock in the show.
No, I saw the questions and I didn't want to think about, because I was like, which one is my favorite rock, but I didn't decide before. And so, I actually like one of the call rocks the best because it's like really, really plain. And I was hoping that there would be one that was, because they are also interesting looking, but there's like a very basic circle rock that you find on the sidewalk. And so that one I think is it's easier to step over the aesthetic of the exhibition to get to what the categorization and bigger questions of the work are.
One of the other things I was thinking about being in the show on a third time was that one of the implications of the things in the show is that everything has a meaning. Like rocks have meaning. The way you categorize things gives meaning to things, that whether or not they actually have any meaning at all, that there's a very human thing to assign meaning to everything in the world around us. Is that something you're conscious of? I mean, I guess it's something that comes up in an AI world where every question has an answer. Whereas in the real world there are lots of questions with no answers, or lots of objects with no meanings.
I think that everything has a meaning, though. Everything that we recognize has a meaning. Not everything has a meaning, actually. Everything we recognize has a meaning. So as soon as you see something and you try to GPS yourself around the objects that are around you, then immediately you try to be like, it has gravity. That's already meaning, And so with the stones, what I thought would be easier for the audience to understand, because they're abstract, that is very close to like what artists do, like there's nothing and then you make a something and make a border of empty space.
So I'm curious about this idea that there's nothing and then there's something with art, because obviously from a logical point of view, that's not possible. Nothing comes from nothing, right? And in a way, even with the rocks, there's a rock, and then there's a rock that reminds someone of a camel. But there's something before the camel. But and I guess the question is, do you think that art really comes out from nowhere?
It's not nothing from something from nothing, actually. But I think it's more like art comes from irrecognizable, unperceivable moments of making meaning that accumulate, and all of a sudden you're like, that accumulation becomes perceivable to author and then synthesized. But I think it's the same with a stone, or like things that you don't really pay attention to. Like you still recognize that, like, even stuff in the background is like has gravity or whatever, but you're not overthinking about that. But accumulatively, then once they have a critical mass, then they become recognizable.
I wanted maybe to pull it back to where we started, which in a way was aesthetics. And you have a particular, your drawings look a certain way, and they're the result of aesthetic choices you've made about how to represent those objects. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about those decisions, like how you decided I want to do this by a drawing as opposed to photographs or words.
I think that for me, drawing has been the main squeeze, because I like drawing it, and I think that when the audience sees it versus a photograph, they immediately feel the time it took to make the photograph. Obviously, it would be a lot simpler for me in life to make a photograph, but once, the drawings are also, once the structure of the works are made, the production is almost interchangeable. I think anybody really can make them if they still spend a lot of time actually rendering it. But for me, the drawings are, my particular work is, the layup to the object, and then it's like the physical making part, printing of this idea. But I also can elaborate, because I know they are very art-looking works, and so when I first think of a project, actually it's just there's no formal part. You know, there's like a collection and there's a system that is invisible. But then I think that the aesthetic choices for me are driven by how much access do I want an audience to have? You know, because I came from a really conceptual background, but you know, many of those works are very inaccessible to people who don't have like an art history or art background at all. And so the audience level is very limited to who will show them how to enter this image. And so by making these very like art-looking objects, what people who don't know that immaterial works material left already, then it allows for like an entryway to these bigger questions about categorization that don't have a shape.
So perhaps with one way of describing your work be to say that you're giving shapes to these shapeless structures. I mean, you can also see it in the kind of shelving arrangements you've picked out.
I think that for me, is recognizing the shape of a system which doesn't have a form. And so, you know, you follow the steps of generations of people, or acquisition policy, or insurance policy, or what are the things that are actually making the form that we see in front. And so that part to me is, I feel like, the main material, and then becomes then synthesizing it into like, how will the audience be able to understand all of these works over this in shapes that don't actually have a physical form, but it's all in relationship to, it's like time-based media, I guess, is the closest thing, immaterial time-based media.
So I'm going to ask one more question before we invite the audience to join in. So after this, you can raise a hand if you want to ask a question, and then we'll call in and speak that way. But I guess one of the other things that it seems more than just institutions and objects and those relations that you're talking about in the work, particularly here in a way, is value, and how we assign value to things, and how value accumulates and accrues and sometimes doesn't make any sense at all. I wonder if that's a way of looking at your work more broadly.
I don't actually see this work as like recognizing this work about stones, period. That's like second level in a way. When I see these works, it's kind of like a portrait of a system that resulted like this. And some of these decisions feel very deliberate, but you know, it's attributed to like the system that is explained in the formation of the work. But I think that the decisions that is attributed to me as an author, like my personal decisions, I think that those are the ones that make no sense, that don't follow a logic that is made in the system. And I think that those are the things that when you look at institutional policy, the people who are working within the system is also making these particular decisions as well. And so I think that the value is being made in relationship to who is looking at a preset placeholder that goes through these, you know, like the object itself is a placeholder for the value to be made each time by a new person.
I wonder if another way of thinking about what you just said is that nothing has a value until someone makes it up.
It's relative. It's always in there's always something.
Yeah.
So it's just relative to the other relationship that it has. It's not only people, it's also
The world.
the other entities.